On December 20th, 1943, a B-17 Flying Fortress, famously christened Lucky Strike, struggled valiantly across the expanse of the English Channel, resembling a gravely injured beast stubbornly clinging to life. Its No. 3 engine was not merely defunct, it was completely absent, having been violently ripped from its moorings by the intense anti-aircraft fire over Bremen, leaving a gaping, grievous wound in the aircraft's wing structure. The fuselage bore crimson streaks, telltale signs of hydraulic fluid hemorrhaging, while the ball turret hung at an alarming, precarious angle, its unfortunate gunner having already perished. By all established protocols, every published regulation, and indeed, every intricate physics calculation meticulously compiled by the Army Air Forces, this particular bomber should have plummeted into the frigid depths of the North Sea at least 20 minutes prior. Yet, against all odds, it defiantly remained airborne. The pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, maintained control of the severely compromised aircraft through an extraordinary fusion of sheer physical exertion, fervent prayer, and an elusive, undocumented modification performed by the ground crew 3 weeks earlier, an intervention not found within any official manual. When Lucky Strike finally made its desperate descent onto the runway at RAF Bassingbourn, it did so precariously on a single landing gear leg. The opposing leg refused to deploy, a direct consequence of the complete absence of hydraulic pressure required for its extension. Webb masterfully skidded the battered fortress down the tarmac, generating a spectacular shower of sparks that illuminated the night sky and was visible from the control tower a mile distant. The awaiting crash crews grimly anticipated recovering fatalities. Instead, they were astonished to discover 8 crewmen emerging under their own power, visibly shaken but miraculously alive. The 9th crew member, the ball turret gunner, had indeed been lost over the target, but the remainder of the crew had returned home, defying the operational analysis which indicated the plane had suffered a complete loss of primary hydraulic function, catastrophic damage to its fuel system, and severe electrical failures that should have rendered controlled flight utterly impossible. Standing amidst the twisted wreckage on that tarmac, Group Commander Colonel James Albertson posed the singular, most pressing inquiry. How? The official, bureaucratic explanation would require many months to formulate. However, the true, unsung answer was already at work in a hangar merely 200 yards away, deeply engrossed in the engine cowling of another B-17, implementing modifications that, if formally documented, would undoubtedly have resulted in a court-martial. Indeed, by late 1943, the Army Air Forces confronted an insidious problem that proved challenging to articulate in their post-mission reports. Bombers were being lost, a grim reality of warfare over Nazi Germany, where the formidable Luftwaffe offered no quarter. Yet, an alarming number of aircraft were succumbing to damage that, by conventional understanding, should not have been fatal. A solitary, precisely placed flak hit could transform a B-17, purportedly capable of absorbing punishment sufficient to obliterate 3 fighter planes, into a spiraling, doomed craft falling from formation. A fundamental flaw in the design was suspected, yet Boeing was understandably reluctant to acknowledge such a deficiency. The Pentagon, for its part, evinced no interest in entertaining such notions, and consequently, flight crews continued to perish. The remarkable survival of Lucky Strike was not a mere stroke of fortune. It stood as irrefutable evidence that an individual had discerned the underlying defect and ingeniously rectified it, employing methods that would undoubtedly induce apoplexy among procurement officers. This narrative chronicles the extraordinary journey of how a single mechanic's unauthorized, forbidden, modifications transformed the B-17 from what was statistically a death sentence on certain missions, into the legendary, resilient survivor it is celebrated as today. This pivotal transformation began with a man whose mechanical acumen was honed not in any formal technical institution, but within the confines of a Depression-era garage in Pittsburgh, where the prevailing ethos was starkly simple: make it work, or it doesn't get fixed. Staff Sergeant Paul Zook was, by all official accounts, not designated to repair aircraft. His Army Air Forces personnel file indicated that his high scores on mechanical aptitude tests warranted assignment to the motor pool, a domain of trucks, jeeps, and the generally unglamorous ground machinery essential for maintaining an air base's operations. However, a perceptive individual within the assignment office at Bassingbourn, upon reviewing Zook's civilian work history, made a lateral reassignment that arguably preserved scores of lives. Prior to the war, Zook had operated a bustling repair shop nestled in Pittsburgh's vibrant Polish Hill neighborhood. There, he had masterfully kept coal trucks, various delivery vans, and the occasional souped-up Ford belonging to local bootleggers, running on budgets so meager they made the poverty line seem opulent. He arrived at Bassingbourn in August 1943, a seasoned 26-year-old, with perpetually greased fingernails and a distinctly unconventional attitude towards regulations, a disposition his commanding officers would alternately find exasperating and utterly indispensable. During his inaugural week on the flight line, he observed a crew chief reject a B-17 due to a cracked hydraulic line. This was standard operating procedure, meticulously adhering to Technical Order 01-2EG2. The requisite replacement part, however, was on back order, condemning the aircraft to remain grounded. Consequently, the mission proceeded with one bomber short. Zook, ever the pragmatist, inquired why they couldn't simply bypass the compromised section and reroute the system through the secondary line. The crew chief regarded him with an expression of profound disbelief, as if he had proposed mending the wings with baling wire. "That's not in the manual, Sergeant," he retorted. Zook's memorable response, delivered in a thick, resonant Pittsburgh accent that could seemingly be cut with a wrench, quickly became legendary within the maintenance section. "The manual didn't grow up fixing trucks during the Depression. I did." Herein lay the fundamental distinction between Zook and the mechanics who had received their training in Army technical schools. Those individuals possessed the capability to flawlessly follow a technical order, execute repairs precisely as specified by Boeing engineers, and maintain a B-17 to its original factory specifications. Zook, conversely, possessed the unique ability to scrutinize a failing system and pose a crucial question that the engineers had apparently overlooked. What transpires when this system fails over Germany, and there is no parts depot available at 20,000 feet? His genius resided not merely in comprehending how things were designed to function, but in his profound understanding of how they could still be made to work even when everything else had gone catastrophically awry. By October, other mechanics began to observe an intriguing pattern. Aircraft serviced by Zook exhibited an uncanny tendency to return from missions they, by all rational assessment, should not have survived. A bomber he had worked on sustained a direct flak hit through its hydraulic bay. This should have resulted in a complete loss of landing gear control, yet the pilot miraculously managed a wheels-down landing. Another aircraft experienced a total failure of its primary electrical system after a fierce fighter attack. Nevertheless, its instruments continued to function just long enough to guide the navigator safely home. "Coincidence," the crew chief would dismissively declare. "Lucky coincidence." Zook, however, harbored no belief in mere luck. His unwavering faith lay in redundancy, in robust backup systems, and in rerouting critical functions through alternative pathways that were entirely absent from the original Boeing blueprints. This was because Boeing, in their pursuit of elegant, efficient designs, had seemingly never contemplated the devastating consequences when their beautiful, yet inherently single-point-of-failure systems encountered the brutal efficacy of German 88mm flak. While other mechanics diligently replaced damaged parts, Zook was actively redesigning entire systems on the fly, ingeniously utilizing scavenged components, repurposed tubing, and electrical connections that would undoubtedly have brought an official inspector to tears. The other mechanics affectionately, or perhaps exasperatedly, began to refer to him as the plumber, due to his constant habit of rerouting something, be it hydraulic lines, fuel feeds, or intricate electrical bundles. He would routinely spend hours beyond his official duty period in the cavernous hangars, a flashlight clenched between his teeth, meticulously rewiring aircraft in ways that never appeared on the official maintenance logs. This was primarily because, technically speaking, his actions violated approximately 15 distinct Army regulations. When queried as to why he bothered, given that he could have comfortably remained in the motor pool, enjoying coffee, and avoiding such complications, Zook's response was characteristically straightforward. "Those guys fly the missions. The least I can do is make sure the plane doesn't kill them on the way home." The B-17 Flying Fortress was widely touted as indestructible. Boeing's marketing campaigns practically asserted as much, and the initial combat reports from 1942 appeared to validate this claim. Fortresses frequently returned from harrowing missions resembling flying cheese graters, riddled with countless holes punched through their wings and fuselages. Yet, with remarkable tenacity, they continued to fly. Crews, for good reason, bestowed upon them the moniker, "Flying Fortress." These formidable machines possessed an astonishing capacity to absorb punishment that would utterly pulverize a B-24. However, by late 1943, a disturbing and unspoken pattern began to emerge within the lost statistics. Aircraft were not solely being shot down by concentrated fighter attacks or direct flak hits to unequivocally critical areas. They were, instead, succumbing to single points of failure. A solitary hit in the wrong location could cause a bomber, valued at $200,000 and carrying a crew of 10 highly trained airmen, to spiral uncontrollably from formation and vanish. The 8th Air Force was experiencing an alarming loss rate of approximately 5% per mission by the autumn of 1943. A grim calculation revealed that a crew's probability of surviving the mandated 25-mission tour was, disturbingly, little more than a coin flip. Something was contributing to the destruction of B-17s that should not have proven fatal. It required mechanics like Zook, meticulously examining the wreckage, to ultimately pinpoint the core issue, the hydraulics. The B-17's hydraulic system governed every vital function essential for survival in combat: the landing gear, the brakes, the wing flaps, and most critically, the turret systems that enabled gunners to track incoming enemy fighters. Boeing had engineered an efficient system with primary lines routed through the fuselage in neat, compact bundles, a logical design choice for peacetime efficiency. However, efficiency in this context also implied concentration. A single piece of flak penetrating the wrong 6-inch section of the fuselage could lead to a simultaneous loss of hydraulic pressure to multiple critical systems. A bomber could possess 3 fully functioning engines, intact wings, and a healthy crew, yet without hydraulics, the landing gear could not be deployed. An B-17 attempting a belly landing on an English runway frequently resulted in the aircraft erupting into flames. Compounding these issues was the fuel system, which possessed its own insidious methods of imperiling lives. The B-17 carried a substantial 2,780 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel distributed across 9 separate tanks, 5 strategically located within the wings and 4 within the fuselage. The fuel feed system was ingeniously designed to draw fuel from the outer wing tanks inward, thereby maintaining aircraft balance. This was sensible engineering in theory, except that the fuel lines connecting these tanks traversed areas that were unequivocally within the cone of fire when German fighters executed beam attacks from the 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock positions. A 20mm cannon round piercing a fuel line did not merely signify a catastrophic loss of fuel, though that was an immediate consequence. It also meant that highly volatile aviation gasoline was now spraying uncontrollably inside an airframe where hot metal, electrical sparks, and exposure to open air at -40 degrees Fahrenheit created the perfect, lethal conditions for either an explosive fire or a debilitating vapor lock. Sergeant Zook, with his keen observational skills, had discerned a critical vulnerability that eluded the meticulous scrutiny of official engineering reports. He observed that aircraft succumbing to what were often labeled as mysterious causes frequently exhibited telltale pre-impact fuel system anomalies. Reports from pilots painted a grim picture. Initially, engines would run roughly, followed by an abrupt and complete engine failure, culminating in the entire airframe violently shaking itself apart or erupting into a catastrophic fire. Subsequent post-crash analyses, whenever sufficient remnants survived the inferno for examination, consistently highlighted issues such as pervasive fuel contamination or the insidious presence of air within the fuel lines. The underlying mechanism, once recognized, was disarmingly straightforward. A direct hit from flak or enemy bullets would inevitably compromise a vital fuel line, allowing air to ingress into the intricate fuel delivery network. This infiltration would then cause engines to cease functioning in a deadly, sequential cascade, given their reliance on this shared, now compromised system. Consequently, the bomber would invariably plummet, not primarily due to overwhelming structural damage, but because its vital power source had been fatally disrupted. Ultimately, the mighty aircraft became utterly incapacitated, not primarily as a direct consequence of battle damage itself, but rather because its essential systems were, in effect, suffocating. The brilliant engineers at Boeing had meticulously crafted an airplane capable of performing flawlessly when operating under pristine, theoretical conditions. However, the grim reality of aerial combat raging over Germany in 1943 diverged dramatically from any such ideal scenario. This was an unforgiving environment where every single operational system had to be robust enough to anticipate and endure damage, yet still retain its functionality. The true Achilles heel of the formidable B-17 Flying Fortress lay not in its armor plating or its formidable firepower, but in a pervasive design philosophy that embraced single points of failure. It was precisely this critical vulnerability that Zook, with quiet determination, began to rectify, implementing his unauthorized modifications one painstaking step at a time. The actions undertaken by Sergeant Zook, while unconventional, did not strictly constitute a breach of legal statutes. Yet, the gravity of his endeavor transcended mere legality. It represented a profound transgression in the form of unauthorized field modifications to critical combat aircraft systems. The chilling implication of such an act was clear. Should any aircraft suffer a catastrophic failure and subsequent crash, and if investigators were to meticulously trace the root cause to his clandestine work, he would undoubtedly face the severe consequences of a court-martial, potentially on charges of negligent homicide. However, Zook approached this perilous equation with a starkly different calculus. From his perspective, an action guaranteed a continuation of the tragic losses, with planes inevitably succumbing to their inherent vulnerabilities. By intervening, he reasoned, he offered these beleaguered aircraft and their crews a fighting chance at survival. At the heart of Zook's audacious and officially forbidden modifications lay a brutally simple yet profoundly effective principle: introduce redundancy where Boeing's original designs had conspicuously omitted it. This meant transforming the aircraft's hydraulic system, initially conceived with a tidy, highly efficient, single-bundle architecture, into a labyrinthine network of backup lines. While this re-engineering might have appeared to be a veritable plumber's nightmare in its chaotic visual complexity, its true genius lay in its unwavering functionality precisely when the primary system sustained battle damage. Zook ingeniously began to scavenge discarded hydraulic tubing from the skeletal remains of damaged aircraft languishing in the salvage yard, materials that, by strict regulation, were designated for official recycling and returned to supply depots. He would meticulously cut pristine sections of the salvage line, rigorously testing them for pressure integrity using a rudimentary, hand-operated pump he had ingeniously jury-rigged, before painstakingly installing them as vital bypass routes within actively flying combat aircraft. In practical application, the ingenious modification unfolded as follows. A conventional B-17 was originally equipped with a singular, primary hydraulic line extending from the central pump towards the critical landing gear actuators. Zook, in his innovative approach, would ingeniously tap into this main conduit at two distinct points, one strategically positioned forward, proximate to the cockpit, and another located aft, near the radio room. From these access points, he would then route a secondary, entirely separate line along an alternative trajectory, typically nestled securely alongside the fuselage stringers, thereby affording it enhanced protection from direct impacts by the surrounding structural members. Subsequently, he meticulously installed manual isolation valves at each critical junction point, utilizing components meticulously cannibalized from other battle-damaged bombers. The operational advantage was profound. Should the primary hydraulic line sustain a hit and experience a critical loss of pressure, the pilot could, with a swift and decisive action, Zook having prudently mounted these crucial valves within easy arm's reach, manually engage the backup line. This solution, admittedly, lacked the aesthetic grace of factory engineering. It undeniably added a measure of supplementary weight. Furthermore, it flagrantly contravened the precise stipulations of Technical Order ZO-120 EG2 Section 4 Paragraph 12 Subsection C. Yet, for the aircrews, it represented the crucial distinction between executing a controlled landing safely on their wheels, or enduring the terrifying prospect of a belly landing, skidding precariously down the runway, while offering desperate prayers for survival. The modifications Zook implemented for the fuel system proved to be even more audacious in their scope and ingenuity. He recognized that it was simply impossible to entirely shield fuel lines from the inevitable onslaught of enemy flak. This was an undeniable reality of aerial combat. However, what he could achieve was to prevent a localized hit from escalating into a catastrophic, complete system failure. His solution involved the strategic installation of crossover valves between the various fuel tank systems, ingeniously repurposing fuel petcocks originally designed for ground refueling operations. While official regulations strictly mandated that these particular valves were to be utilized exclusively during ground-based procedures, Zook boldly installed them in positions readily accessible to the crew during flight. Furthermore, he shrewdly documented these alterations on maintenance forms under the ambiguous, yet technically accurate, designation of refueling system check valves, a phrase deliberately chosen for its vagueness. With this innovation, when a fuel line inevitably sustained damage, pilots gained the critical ability to isolate the compromised tank and seamlessly reroute the vital flow of fuel from other, intact tanks directly to the engines that desperately required it. However, it was arguably the profound modification to the electrical system that truly emerged as Zook's most life-saving contribution. The B-17s were originally configured with a singular, primary electrical bus, a central artery that supplied power to every essential component, ranging from the intricate flight instruments to the formidable turret motors. A single, well-placed hit to this critical bus would plunge the aircraft into a state of flying dark, a terrifying scenario devoid of instruments, radio communication, and operational gun turrets. Zook ingeniously circumvented this vulnerability by routing secondary power lines directly from the auxiliary generator to these most critical systems, thereby completely bypassing the vulnerable main bus. He masterfully concealed these supplementary lines within existing cable bundles, making them appear indistinguishable from standard factory wiring unless one meticulously traced their actual connections. A subtle yet crucial detail was his choice of a distinct yellow insulation, contrasting sharply with the standard black, a visual cue designed to inform pilots precisely which breakers governed the activation of these vital emergency backup systems. The profound brilliance embedded within Zook's methodology stemmed not from the invention of novel technologies. On the contrary, every component he integrated was already either present on the aircraft itself or readily available within the standard parts bins. His true genius lay in his ability to reconfigure these existing puzzle pieces in innovative ways that Boeing's original engineers had simply failed to envision. Their design philosophy had been primarily geared towards optimizing manufacturing efficiency, driven by the imperative of rapid wartime production, rather than prioritizing the ultimate combat survivability of the airframe. A B-17 bomber rolling off the Seattle production line in 1943 was fundamentally engineered for swift assembly by a workforce, many of whom had transitioned from domestic roles as housewives just 6 months prior. Zook's intricate modifications, however, demanded the discerning eye and profound understanding of a highly skilled mechanic, one who possessed a deep grasp of systems theory and, crucially, harbored no compunctions about diverging from the established blueprint when strict adherence to that blueprint demonstrably resulted in the tragic loss of human lives. By the advent of January 1944, Zook had, with remarkable discretion, successfully modified a total of 17 B-17s within the operational fleet of the 351st Bomb Group. He meticulously avoided any form of self-promotion or official documentation of his clandestine work. Instead, he systematically executed these crucial alterations during the quiet solitude of night maintenance shifts, periods when the presence of inquisitive officers was significantly reduced, thereby minimizing the likelihood of awkward inquiries. The most compelling testament to his efforts was the undeniable fact that these 17 particular bombers were now consistently returning from their perilous missions at a survival rate that was beginning to defy all conventional statistical probabilities. On the crisp morning of February 8, 1944, Captain Ronald Fletcher, who served as the discerning engineering officer for the 351st Bomb Group, was experiencing an already troublesome day that was poised to escalate into far greater complexity. He had been diligently conducting routine maintenance inspections, a standard procedure involving the random selection of aircraft from the flight line to rigorously verify their conformity with official technical documentation. It was during one such inspection, as he unlatched the hydraulic access panel on a B-17 affectionately christened Devil's Daughter, that he encountered a bewildering array of plumbing configurations that unequivocally defied all established norms. Fletcher was by no means an unintelligent man. Indeed, He had pursued aeronautical engineering studies at MIT prior to the war, possessing an innate aptitude for deciphering complex blueprints. What lay before his eyes bore no resemblance to any Boeing schematic he had ever scrutinized. He observed secondary hydraulic lines snaking through wholly non-standard routes, manual isolation valves meticulously installed in bespoke locations necessitating custom bracketry, and fuel crossover connections ingeniously fabricated from components seemingly sourced from three disparate aircraft. Crucially, the entirety of this intricate work exhibited a level of meticulous craftsmanship that immediately dismissed any notion of a hasty, sloppy field expedient. This was, without a doubt, a deliberate and profoundly considered modification. Captain Fletcher located Zook deep within Hangar 3, engrossed in the demanding task of an engine swap. Without preamble, he addressed the sergeant. "Sergeant, we absolutely need to discuss the hydraulic system of Devil's Daughter." Zook, seemingly unfazed, did not even divert his gaze from the cowling he was meticulously torquing, responding with a simple, "What about it?" Fletcher, clipboard in hand, pressed the issue with growing intensity. "What about it? What about the incontrovertible fact that there are approximately 40 feet of completely unauthorized hydraulic line installed in a non-standard routing, complete with manually operated valves that are entirely absent from any technical orders?" Zook then deliberately lowered his wrench, slowly wiped his grimy hands on a rag that miraculously appeared even filthier than his hands themselves, and fixed Fletcher with a gaze that conveyed an equal measure of weary resignation and resolute defiance. "Do you desire the official answer, or the unvarnished truth?" Fletcher's rejoinder was instantaneous and unequivocal. "Both. And begin by telling me how long you have been engaged in this, and precisely how many aircraft have been affected." 17 planes. This stark declaration, delivered with Zook's characteristic bluntness, caused Captain Fletcher's blood pressure to surge alarmingly. 17 combat aircraft currently in active service, operating with completely undocumented modifications to their primary flight systems. Fletcher articulated, the sheer scale of the transgression sinking in. The regulatory violation was nothing short of staggering, carrying with it the very real possibility of Zook facing a severe court-martial, while Fletcher himself could confront disciplinary action for his failure to detect these illicit alterations sooner. Yet, in a pivotal moment, Fletcher posed a question that irrevocably shifted the entire dynamic of their encounter. "Have any of these 17 aircraft experienced hydraulic failure?" In response, Zook calmly retrieved a grease-stained notebook from the pocket of his coveralls, his own meticulously kept, albeit unofficial, personal maintenance log. "3 of those aircraft," Zook recounted, "sustained direct flak hits to their primary hydraulic lines. Every single one of them made it safely back to base utilizing the backup system I installed. Devil's Daughter, for instance, executed a flawless landing on her own gear just 2 weeks prior, after an 80mm shell obliterated her primary line over Frankfurt." The pilot, remarkably, remained entirely unaware he was operating on the backup system until I personally pointed out the extent of the damage during the post-flight inspection. Fletcher, rapidly processing the implications, performed a mental calculation. 3 instances of catastrophic hydraulic damage, yet a remarkable 0 losses. Conventional statistical projections dictated that at least 2 of those stricken aircraft should have been irretrievably lost or written off. By midday, Fletcher had swiftly escalated the extraordinary situation to Group Commander Albertson, the very same astute colonel who had personally witnessed the lucky strike's improbable, miraculous landing just a few months prior in December. By 1400 hours, Albertson himself was physically present in the hangar, meticulously scrutinizing Zook's unauthorized modifications, with Fletcher offering precise technical narration. And by 1600 hours, a distinctly uncomfortable meeting was convened in the group operations office, where the central, polarizing question under deliberation was whether to subject Zook to a punitive court-martial or to bestow upon him a commendation in the form of a medal. Major Henry Watkins, dispatched from the esteemed 8th Air Force Engineering Staff, arrived on February 10th with the explicit mandate to conduct a formal investigation into the burgeoning controversy. He dedicated an intensive 3 days to meticulously examining Zook's modified aircraft, painstakingly photographing each innovative installation, rigorously reviewing the maintenance logs, both official and Zook's personal records, and conducting extensive interviews with the pilots who had flown these uniquely adapted bombers. His preliminary report, officially filed on February 13th, contained a particularly weighty paragraph that likely demanded considerable deliberation to compose, as it unequivocally conceded that the Army Air Forces had, in essence, been dispatching its brave crews into the crucible of combat aboard aircraft burdened with preventably vulnerable design flaws. The report stated, while SSGT Zook's modifications are unauthorized and violate standing technical orders, preliminary analysis suggests these changes address systemic vulnerability in hydraulic and fuel system design that may contribute to combat losses. Recommend against punitive action pending engineering evaluation and controlled testing. That crucial paragraph, while ultimately vindicating Zook's professional standing, simultaneously unveiled a vulnerability the Pentagon had assiduously sought to keep concealed. It opened the door to unsettling inquiries regarding the number of aircrews who might have tragically perished due to Boeing's design choices, which seemingly prioritized the efficiency of production over the imperative of combat survivability. In response, Albertson rendered a pragmatic command decision, one that likely stretched the boundaries of established regulations. Zook would not face punitive charges, yet he was immediately prohibited from undertaking any further modifications to aircraft until a thorough engineering evaluation had been meticulously completed. Nevertheless, during this interim period, those 17 bombers continued to fly their perilous missions, a testament to the fact that even high-ranking military officials could readily comprehend the stark realities presented by survival statistics. On March 3, 1944, Major Watkins was dispatched back to Bassingbourn, accompanied by a contingent of 2 Boeing engineers, a specialized team of technical experts from the Army Air Forces, and an imperative mandate. This directive essentially compelled them to either unequivocally prove the efficacy of Zook's modifications or conclusively demonstrate their inherent danger, all while emphasizing an urgent need for speed, given the critical attrition rate of bombers over Germany. What subsequently unfolded constituted arguably the most unorthodox, high-stakes engineering validation in the annals of military aviation history. The rigorous testing of unauthorized field modifications under the brutal conditions of actual combat, all while grappling with the ambiguous task of determining whether to document these findings as groundbreaking innovation or as incriminating evidence for a potential court-martial. The Boeing engineers, both civilians operating under military contract, were visibly dismayed upon their initial inspection. The lead engineer, a man named Carlson, who had been intricately involved in the original B-17 design process in Seattle, dedicated his first hour at Bassingbourn to articulating a litany of technical concerns. He voiced apprehension about contamination risk, pressure regulation concerns, and the potential for catastrophic failure modes. Standing before a partially disassembled bomber, he meticulously dissected Zook's bypass lines, explaining to Watkins with unwavering conviction why such an arrangement was fundamentally unsound, contending that it transgressed basic hydraulic system design principles meticulously established by credentialed engineers. Zook, adorned in grease-stained coveralls, allowed Carlson to conclude his technical exposition before interjecting with a pointed question. "When's the last time you flew a combat mission?" Carlson, visibly bristling at the query, retorted, "I'm an engineer, not a pilot." Zook, with a deliberate nod, underscored the divergence in their viewpoints. "Right. So, you meticulously designed this system in the controlled environment of Seattle, where the most severe consequence is a failed pressure test. Conversely, I am tasked with maintaining these birds when they return with gaping holes in their fuselage. A vastly different perspective, indeed." Watkins' subsequent proposal was nothing short of audacious. It involved outfitting a selection of Zook's modified aircraft with a comprehensive array of additional instrumentation, including pressure gauges, flow meters, and various monitoring equipment. These aircraft would then be dispatched on actual combat missions, with their system performance meticulously recorded throughout. In any conventional procurement process, such an undertaking would necessitate months of preliminary ground testing. However, the prevailing circumstances were those of March 1944. The air war over Germany was rapidly approaching its peak intensity, and the 8th Air Force was enduring an average loss of 6 bombers per mission. The urgency of the situation dictated that they simply did not possess the luxury of months. Between March 5th and March 18th, 5 of Zook's uniquely modified B-17s undertook a total of 11 combat missions, targeting strategic locations such as Berlin, Brunswick, and Friedrichshafen. Each of these aircraft was equipped with a comprehensive array of sensors that meticulously recorded critical data, including hydraulic pressure, fuel flow rates, and electrical system performance throughout the entirety of each sortie. Remarkably, 3 of these bombers sustained battle damage. Despite this, all 5 successfully returned to base. The accumulated data was unequivocally irrefutable. During the sortie to Friedrichshafen on March 18th, a bomber designated Memphis Belle II, one of Zook's modified aircraft, sustained a direct hit from an 88mm flak burst. This impact obliterated the primary hydraulic line precisely at the point where Boeing's original design had routed it along the bomb bay. The onboard instrumentation meticulously recorded the primary system pressure plummeting to 0 within a mere 4.2 seconds. Under standard operating procedures, this scenario would have mandated that the aircraft be rendered incapable of controlling its landing gear, flaps, or brakes. However, the pilot of Memphis Belle II, adhering strictly to briefing instructions personally imparted by Zook, instinctively reached down and rotated 3 manual isolation valves. The expertly installed backup system immediately activated. Hydraulic pressure swiftly regained stability, settling at 85% of normal. While this figure was undeniably lower than ideal, it remained well within operational parameters. The bomber maintained its position within the formation, executed its objective by completing its bomb run, and subsequently landed safely at Bassingbourn on its own gear. On the ground, engineers, observing their monitoring equipment, realized with profound astonishment that they were witnessing an anomalous event, a hydraulic system that had demonstrably survived what should have been a catastrophic failure. Carlson, the Boeing engineer, observed the data playback in profound astonishment, maintaining a stunned silence. Finally, he turned to Watkins and conceded something that he likely found difficult to admit. "This shouldn't work. The pressure dynamics are entirely incorrect. The flow rates are inadequate, and there's no proper filtration within the bypass system. Yet, it does work. I confess I do not comprehend why, but it undeniably functions." Zook, positioned discreetly at the rear of the briefing room, articulated a philosophy that likely did not find its way into any official report. It works because I designed it to work when everything's already gone to hell. Your system operates flawlessly until it encounters a failure. Mine, by contrast, operates suboptimally all the time, but it consistently persists in functionality. The rigorous testing phase culminated in the production of 47 pages of detailed technical data, 11 comprehensive mission after action reports, and an unequivocal finding that Air Force engineering could not, under any circumstances, disregard. Zook's innovative modifications demonstrably augmented system survivability without in any way impairing the primary system's function. In essence, he had rendered the aircraft safer without introducing any detrimental compromises to their operational capabilities. On March 22, Watkins formally submitted his final report, which contained a recommendation that would send far-reaching ripples through every B-17 squadron stationed in England. The official sanctioning of field modifications based on Zook's ingenious design, coupled with the imperative to commence instruction for mechanics across all 8th Air Force groups. April 1944. While the Pentagon deliberated over intricate official procurement channels, and Boeing entered into protracted negotiations for retrofit contracts that would not materialize until June at the earliest, a different, more organic phenomenon was unfolding organically on airfields across East Anglia. Mechanics were engaged in direct communication with one another. And when mechanics converse, their discussions do not center on policy. Rather, they prioritize functionality and what demonstrably works. Staff Sergeant Mike Delacroix, assigned to the 303rd Bomb Group at Molesworth, had been apprised of Zook's modification through a crew chief who had transferred from Bassingbourn. By April 8, Delacroix made his way to Bassingbourn during a routine supply run, notebook in hand, and eagerly sought Zook's expertise, requesting a detailed walkthrough of the hydraulic bypass installation. Zook meticulously demonstrated every connection point, every valve placement, and every critical routing decision over a period of 3 hours. Delacroix returned to Molesworth and expeditiously integrated the modifications into aircraft that very night. Within a single week, the 303rd Bomb Group had 5 of its bombers running Zook's enhanced system. Word of these vital modifications subsequently spread to Technical Sergeant James, who at Thorpe Abbotts, who heard about them from Delacroix. By April 15th, the 100th Bomb Group, notoriously known as the Bloody 100th, for having endured the worst loss rate in the entire 8th Air Force, had its mechanics laboring tirelessly on double shifts to install the bypass systems on every operational aircraft. They circumvented official protocols, refraining from submitting modification requests. They simply proceeded with the installations, compelled by the grim reality of having witnessed too many bombers go down from damage that, with Zook's system, should have been survivable. This period marked a spontaneous engineering insurgency, propagating rapidly through informal networks, while official channels remained mired in debates concerning committee structures and administrative minutiae. Master Sergeant Robert Chen, stationed at Kimbolton, diligently compiled statistics that the Air Force itself had not yet begun to track. In March, prior to any modifications, the 379th Bomb Group had recorded a 14% abort rate attributable to mechanical failures during missions. By late April, with 12 aircraft now running Zook's modifications, that critical rate had demonstrated a marked reduction, plummeting to 6%. Chen's log book, unofficial and unrecognized by headquarters, revealed an even more profound disparity. Modified aircraft that sustained battle damage were 3 times more likely to return safely to base than their unmodified counterparts that had incurred comparable damage. The formal endorsement finally arrived on April 28, 1944, codified as Technical Order 0120 EG 2127. field modification for enhanced hydraulic system redundancy in B-17F and B-17G aircraft. It comprised 6 pages of tedious administrative prose that, in essence, belatedly legalized what dozens of mechanics had already been performing for weeks. However, the technical order was notably reticent and limited in scope. It authorized only the hydraulic modifications, making no mention whatsoever of Zook's fuel system crossovers or electrical bypasses. This omission was due to Boeing's pertinacious assertion that these additional modifications were both unnecessary and potentially dangerous. Zook perused the technical order and emitted a bitter laugh. It was not a laugh of joy, but rather the sardonic amusement of a man who had witnessed the bureaucratic machinery almost court-martial him for saving lives, and was now observing that same bureaucracy usurping accolades while implementing only half of the necessary fix. He persisted in installing fuel crossovers during the night shift, unauthorized as ever, because the directives emanating from headquarters did not alter the undeniable fact that B-17s were still going down due to critical fuel system failures. By May 1944, the modification had disseminated to approximately 120 aircraft across 7 distinct bomb groups. The official count, representing aircraft modified strictly under the new technical order, stood at a mere 41. That significant discrepancy between the official and actual numbers epitomized the pragmatic assessment made by countless mechanics. They looked at the regulations, they looked at the planes, and they made the same choice Zook had made, that when lives were on the line, it was imperative to act decisively and beg forgiveness rather than seek permission. The survival statistics began manifesting themselves unequivocally, reaching a point where the Air Force could no longer disregard their implications. The 341st Bomb Group, Zook's parent unit, where nearly every operational B-17 now incorporated the comprehensive array of alterations, including the unauthorized fuel and electrical work, demonstrated a substantially lower loss rate of 2.1% in May 1944. This contrasted sharply with the 8th Air Force average, which stood at 3.8%. In May 1944, the operational landscape for the 8th Air Force presented a sobering statistical reality. During that month, the average loss rate for its bomber aircraft stood at a critical 3.8%, a figure that, while seemingly modest, belied a profound and tragic impact on the lives of airmen. This seemingly small percentage, when extrapolated across an entire month of intensive aerial operations involving thousands of bomber sorties, translated into a significant number of air crews. It represented dozens of vital personnel who successfully returned to their bases, rather than being tragically classified as missing in action or irrevocably lost to the perils of combat. Colonel Albertson, demonstrating a moment of either profound strategic brilliance or potentially self-sabotaging career risk, extended an invitation to an 8th Air Force statistical analysis team to visit Bassingbourn in early June. Their mission was to conduct a thorough review of the group's detailed survival data. With remarkable transparency, he laid bare all pertinent information for their scrutiny: the officially sanctioned aircraft modifications, the numerous unofficial alterations implemented by his mechanics, and the raw numerical data supporting their efficacy. The subsequent report from the analysis team, formally submitted on June 9, contained a single, impactful sentence that unequivocally validated the practical knowledge already held by every skilled mechanic on the flight line. It declared, "Statistical correlation between modified aircraft and improved survivability is significant beyond normal variance and warrants expanded implementation," thereby providing scientific endorsement for the field-developed innovations. This groundbreaking revolution in aircraft resilience had, by then, transcended its origins to become official policy. Zook's ingenious approach had effectively been adopted as a foundational template. Nevertheless, across various airfields in England, dedicated mechanics continued to perform unauthorized modifications during their off-duty hours, as official policy had not yet fully incorporated the complete scope of Zook's comprehensive fixes. In essence, they had all become Zook, every sergeant wielding a wrench, who, confronted with a rigid regulation, made the conscious and courageous decision that ensuring the safe return of aircrews far outweighed the strict adherence to an outdated manual. By August 1945, a mere 3 months after the cessation of hostilities in Europe, a diligent statistician at Air Force Headquarters, Captain Dorothy Henshaw, painstakingly compiled a report. Though destined never to achieve widespread publication, this document told an irrefutable story through numbers that defied any argument. She meticulously gathered mission data from every B-17 group within the 8th Air Force, cross-referencing this extensive information with detailed maintenance logs. These logs carefully documented which aircraft had received Zook's modifications, encompassing both the officially recognized and the previously unofficial alterations that mechanics had assiduously recorded after the fact. Her subsequent correlation analysis was so rigorous and insightful that it would undoubtedly have garnered immense pride from her former statistics professors. Henshaw's findings were compelling. Bomber groups demonstrating 75% or higher adoption of the full modification package, encompassing critical hydraulic, fuel, and electrical systems, exhibited a remarkable 23.4% improvement in aircraft return rates when compared to their operational baseline prior to these enhancements. This significant figure translated directly into 347 additional bombers successfully completing their missions and returning safely, rather than succumbing to enemy fire or mechanical failure over Germany or the treacherous North Sea. When factoring in the standard 10 crew members per aircraft, and further accounting for instances where some crews survived even when their aircraft were lost, Zook's once forbidden fix was credibly estimated to have preserved the lives of somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 airmen who would otherwise have been killed, captured, or listed as missing. Yet, the most profoundly significant number lay somewhat obscured within Henshaw's detailed appendix data. It revealed that aircraft equipped with the complete Zook modification package, even those sustaining Category 3 damage, a classification defined as damage necessitating major structural repair or complete system replacement, returned to base an astonishing 81% of the time. In stark contrast, unmodified aircraft suffering identical levels of severe damage managed to return only 47% of the time. This dramatic disparity underscored that while the modifications did not render the B-17s invulnerable to harm, they fundamentally transformed what might previously have been considered merely survivable damage into concrete, life-saving, actual survival. This tangible outcome represented a stark departure from the grim reality of statistical loss. Paul Zook was officially mustered out of the Army Air Forces in November 1945, holding the rank of technical sergeant. He was awarded an Army Commendation Medal for his exceptional technical proficiency in aircraft maintenance. Conspicuously absent from his official service record, however, was any mention of the groundbreaking field modifications that had, in reality, defined his monumental contribution to the war effort. He quietly returned to Pittsburgh, where he reopened his modest repair shop on Polish Hill. For the next 3 decades, he dedicated himself to the diligent work of fixing cars, trucks, and the occasional airplane belonging to a local flying club. Throughout these years, he remained characteristically reticent, rarely speaking about the war or his pivotal role within it. In 1973, a dedicated researcher named Dr. Michael Torres, affiliated with the esteemed Air Force Historical Research Agency, embarked on a comprehensive study of wartime field modifications. During the course of his extensive investigation, Torres successfully located and tracked down Zook, initiating a long-overdue connection. Dr. Torres spent 3 intensive days in Pittsburgh, meticulously interviewing Zook and carefully reviewing the personal maintenance logs Zook had painstakingly kept throughout his service. These were the grease-stained notebooks, filled with invaluable insights, that had inexplicably never been incorporated into official military records. Torres posed the fundamental question that, in hindsight, probably should have been addressed some 30 years earlier. Why had Zook risked court-martial to make unauthorized modifications? Zook's response, faithfully preserved in Torres's interview notes, was characteristically blunt and devoid of pretense. "Didn't seem that risky to me," Zook stated simply. He articulated the stark reality that guys were dying because the planes weren't built right. He framed his decision as a clear, moral imperative. "I could fix that, or I could follow the manual." Seemed like an easy choice. His words revealed a profound sense of duty that transcended bureaucratic regulations. The specific B-17 that Zook had first modified, christened Lucky Strike, the bomber that initiated this entire chain of innovation in December 1943, successfully survived the war, only to be eventually scrapped in 1954. However, photographs of its modified hydraulic bay, captured during the crucial 1944 engineering evaluation, found their way into official Air Force maintenance training manuals, where they remained in use well into the 1960s. Pointedly, the accompanying captions consistently omitted any mention of Zook by name, instead generically referring to these critical enhancements as field-developed redundancy modifications. Consequently, entire generations of aircraft mechanics benefited directly from his pioneering work, yet remained entirely unaware of its true originator. The Boeing company itself eventually integrated key elements of Zook's modifications into the production run of the B-17G model, commencing in late 1944. Yet, the official documentation attributed these crucial changes to ongoing engineering refinement, deliberately sidestepping any acknowledgement that they were, in fact, adopting practical field fixes conceived by a mere sergeant with only a high school education, a man who had acquired his profound engineering acumen through the hands-on experience of maintaining Depression-era trucks. The subsequent post-war bomber programs, specifically the B-29 and B-50, fundamentally incorporated redundant hydraulic and fuel systems as intrinsic baseline design features. These critical improvements were unequivocally lessons learned in blood, vividly illustrating the high cost of the experiences gained over the battlefields of Germany, and were meticulously applied by engineers who had thoroughly analyzed the extensive wartime modification data. Paul Zook passed away in 1989 at the age of 72. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette made no mention of B-17s or his profound wartime contributions, noting only that he was a veteran and had successfully operated Zook's auto repair for 4 decades. Following his death, his invaluable personal maintenance logs, the exhaustive, unofficial chronicle of every aircraft he had modified, were generously donated to the Air Force Museum in Dayton. These precious documents now reside within the museum's research archives, readily accessible to any scholar or enthusiast who formally requests them. They comprise 47 notebooks teeming with intricate technical sketches, precise pressure calculations scrawled in the margins, and detailed annotations rendered in a practical mechanics shorthand. Collectively, these unassuming volumes narrate the authentic account of how a single individual's steadfast refusal to blindly adhere to regulations dramatically altered the survival prospects for thousands of airmen, most of whom remained utterly unaware of his name or his pivotal role. Ultimately, Zook's once forbidden trick evolved into standard practice. The maverick individual became a foundational template for innovation. And the enduring lesson derived from his story, that sometimes the people closest to the problem possess unique insights and practical solutions that might elude engineers situated in distant offices, remains profoundly pertinent every time someone has to choose between strictly adhering to a prescribed manual and implementing what demonstrably actually works, especially when human lives hang in the balance.